Chapter 12. Philosophical Liberalism. The rise of liberalism in politics and philosophy provides material for the study of a very general and very important question, namely, what has been the influence of political and social circumstances upon the thoughts of eminent and original thinkers, and conversely, what has been the influence of these men upon subsequent political and social developments. Two opposite errors, both common, are to be guarded against. On the one hand, men who are more familiar with books than with affairs are apt to overestimate the influence of philosophers. When they see some political party proclaiming itself inspired by so-and-so's teaching, they think its actions are attributable to so-and-so, whereas, not infrequently, the philosopher is only acclaimed because he recommends what the party would have done in any case. Writers of books, until recently, almost all exaggerated the effects of their predecessors in the same trade. But conversely, a new error has arisen by reaction against the old one, and this new error consists in regarding theorists as almost passive products of their circumstances, and as having hardly any influence at all upon the course of events. Ideas, according to this view, are the froth on the surface of deep currents, which are determined by material and technical causes. Social changes are no more caused by thought than the flow of a river is caused by the bubbles that reveal its direction to an onlooker. For my part, I believe that the truth lies between these two extremes. Between ideas and practical life, as everywhere else, there is reciprocal interaction. To ask which is cause and which effect is as futile as the problem of the hen and the egg. I shall not waste time upon a discussion of this question in the abstract, but shall consider historically one important case of the general question, namely, the development of liberalism and its offshoots from the end of the 17th century to the present day. Early liberalism was a product of England and Holland, and had certain well-marked characteristics. It stood for religious toleration. It was Protestant, but of a latitudinarian rather than of a fanatical kind. It regarded the wars of religion as silly. It valued commerce and industry, and favored the rising middle class rather than the monarchy and the aristocracy. It had immense respect for the rights of property, especially when accumulated by the labors of the individual possessor. The hereditary principle, though not rejected, was restricted in scope more than it had previously been. In particular, the divine right of kings was rejected in favor of the view that every community has a right, at any rate initially, to choose its own form of government. Implicitly, the tendency of early liberalism was towards democracy tempered by the rights of property. There was a belief, not at first wholly explicit, that all men are born equal, and that their subsequent inequality is a product of circumstances. This led to a great emphasis upon the importance of education as opposed to congenital characteristics. There was a certain bias against government, because governments almost everywhere were in the hands of kings or aristocracies, who seldom either understood or respected the needs of merchants. But this bias was held in check by the hope that the necessary understanding and respect would be won before long. Early liberalism was optimistic, energetic, and philosophic, because it represented growing forces which appeared likely to become victorious without great difficulty, and to bring by their victory great benefits to mankind. It was opposed to everything medieval, both in philosophy and in politics, because medieval theories had been used to sanction the powers of church and king, to justify persecution, and to obstruct the rise of science. But it was opposed equally to the then modern fanaticisms of Calvinists and Anabaptists. It wanted an end to political and theological strife in order to liberate energies for the exciting enterprises of commerce and science, such as the East India Company and the Bank of England, the theory of gravitation, and the discovery of the circulation of the blood. Throughout the Western world, bigotry was giving place to enlightenment. The fear of Spanish power was ending, all classes were increasing in prosperity, and the highest hopes appeared to be warranted by the most sober judgment. For 100 years, nothing occurred to dim these hopes. Then at last they themselves generated the French Revolution, which led directly to Napoleon, and thence to the Holy Alliance. After these events, liberalism had to acquire its second wind before the renewed optimism of the 19th century became possible. Before embarking upon any detail, it will be well to consider the general pattern of the liberal movements from the 17th to the 19th century. This pattern is at first simple, but grows gradually more and more complex. The distinctive character of the whole movement is, in a certain wide sense, individualism, but this is a vague term until further defined. The philosophers of Greece, down to and including Aristotle, were not individualists in the sense in which I wish to use the term. They thought of a man as essentially a member of a community. Plato's Republic, for example, is concerned to define the good community, not the good individual. With the loss of political liberty from the time of Alexander onwards, individualism developed and was represented by the Cynics and Stoics. According to the Stoic philosophy, a man could live a good life in no matter what social circumstances. This was also the view of Christianity, especially before it acquired control of the state. But in the Middle Ages, while mystics kept alive the original individualistic trends in Christian ethics, the outlook of most men, including the majority of philosophers, was dominated by a firm synthesis of dogma, law, and custom, which caused men's theoretical beliefs and practical morality to be controlled by a social institution, namely the Catholic Church. What was true and what was good was to be ascertained not by solitary thought, but by the collective wisdom of councils. The first important breach in this system was made by Protestantism, which asserted that general councils may err. To determine the truth thus became no longer a social but an individual enterprise. Since different individuals reached different conclusions, the result was strife, and theological decisions were sought, no longer in assemblies of bishops, but on the battlefield. Since neither party was able to extirpate the other, it became evident in the end that a method must be found of reconciling intellectual and ethical individualism with ordered social life. This was one of the main problems which early liberalism attempted to solve. Meanwhile, individualism had penetrated into philosophy. Descartes' fundamental certainty, "I think, therefore I am," made the basis of knowledge different for each person, since for each the starting point was his own existence, not that of other individuals or of the community. His emphasis upon the reliability of clear and distinct ideas tended in the same direction, since it is by introspection that we think we discover whether our ideas are clear and distinct. Most philosophy since Descartes has had this intellectually individualistic aspect in a greater or less degree. There are, however, various forms of this general position which have in practice very different consequences. The outlook of the typical scientific discoverer has perhaps the smallest dose of individualism. When he arrives at a new theory, he does so solely because it seems right to him. He does not bow to authority, for if he did, he would continue to accept the theories of his predecessors. At the same time, his appeal is to generally received canons of truth, and he hopes to persuade other men, not by his authority, but by arguments which are convincing to them as individuals. In science, any clash between the individual and society is in essence transitory, since men of science, broadly speaking, all accept the same intellectual standards, and therefore debate and investigation usually produce agreement in the end. This, however, is a modern development. In the time of Galileo, the authority of Aristotle and the Church was still considered at least as cogent as the evidence of the senses. This shows how the element of individualism in scientific method, though not prominent, is nevertheless essential. Early liberalism was individualistic in intellectual matters and also in economics, but was not emotionally or ethically self-assertive. This form of liberalism dominated the English 18th century, the founders of the American Constitution and the French encyclopedists. During the French Revolution, it was represented by the more moderate parties, including the Girondins, but with their extermination it disappeared for a generation from French politics. In England, after the Napoleonic Wars, it again became influential with the rise of the Benthamites and the Manchester School. Its greatest success has been in America, where, unhampered by feudalism and a state church, it has been dominant from 1776 to the present day, or at any rate to 1933.